Alright, so recently, like literally yesterday, I just finished Avatar The Last Airbender, and I have a few things to say about it, but I wanted to talk about the character of Toph in particular, because I really enjoyed her character, and I felt like it depicted the personality and challenges of someone who has a disability in any sort of form, whether physical or mental, in a brilliant way. And it especially hit home for me. It was like it was specifically touching on the aspects of having a disability that I struggled with and that helped me get through it and learn to accept it. And I feel like Toph is a perfect representation of all of those things. And I'll talk about that now, but it just made me love the character. Even though she is blind and I have cerebral palsy, which are two completely different types of disabilities with no correlation whatsoever. I've actually never met a blind person with cerebral palsy, actually. So they have zero correlation. I'm sure there is someone out there but I'm sure they're a very strong person. Anyway, that's besides the point. Toph is an amazing character. I'm gonna talk about this now. Let's start from the beginning though. First thing I'd love to say is the introduction of her being a earthbender is perfect, right? And the way like she's fighting against her parents, doing what she wants to do, testing her limits, which I think is amazing because right, when you have a disability, you're kind of people trying to put limits on you, right? They're like you can't do this, you can't do that because it seems challenging, right? Not out of malice, unlike her parents, it's not really out of malice, it's just out of either a lack of understanding of what your abilities are, which mostly happens in like an education setting or a work setting, or a fear of your safety, which happens from parental figures and stuff like that. Now, this is all understandable, but then as you're aging, you tend to push against it, right? You're like you try to test your limits out and try to figure out for yourself where your limits are. And Toph's kind of the earthbending competitions Toph takes place in is her testing her limits out and figuring out what she can do and figuring out alternative ways to do things she can't do, which I find amazing. That's why, for example, things like the sensing of people through earthbending, fascinating because it's exactly like how people, for me, for example, I have CP and my left side in particular is quite bad, particularly my arm and my leg, right? So, for example, with cooking, I tend to I like people are like hold this a particular way. I don't do that or like cut this or whatever or what would you call it? When you're peeling, yeah, peeling especially. I peel in a very odd way. I have to use what people would consider a very awkward tool compared to what people usually use. I just can't do it. But you use it. You use different tools and in different ways to get the same result. You adapt and you figure it out. And I feel like the earthbending competitions is her trying to do the same thing, which I really related to. Not to mention the metal bending, which we'll get onto in a bit. And then even like getting out of the bath. Larger baths are tougher to get out of unless you have two what you call it, two bars to support your weight so you can jump out. Or not jump out, but kinda not jump, you just hold onto the two bars and lift your body out. But if you don't have that, I learned how to do like a Dempsey rollout, so you gently put your body onto the ground and slightly roll out. That's how I did it. But you learn different ways to adapt to be able to live your life independently. You using with your disability, right? And that's what the earthbending sensing was for Toph, and that was incredibly relatable. Not to mention the idea of the metal bending, right? Because you have to learn different ways to do things, and you have to once you find your limits, you have to improve yourself to help you survive. Like when I found my limit of my walking abilities and my physical abilities, obviously you have to improve that to be able to increase your quality of life. So for the rest of my life now, I will have to keep at a certain level of fitness because the heavier I am, my legs will not be able to support me if I'm too heavy. I get way too out of breath as it is, so being heavier or out of shape will be very bad be very bad for me and my life as a whole. So I need to constantly improve in certain aspects of my life and constantly find new ways to do things. And that's what Toph's metal bending was. And I just found all that really, really relatable, you know? It was like, she's a very good character and a very, very good depiction of those two things. But that's her physical abilities, right? As I said before, like, her personality also is very, very good, and I enjoyed it immensely. Her want to not have help, her want to be independent is so accurate, because even to this day, it's very hard to accept help, right? You feel like you're being undermined, even if no one's intending to undermine you. You want to show you're able to live your own life because you don't want to be limited by people thinking you can't. And you don't want to come across as incapable. And this happens more so if you're, let's say, if you're severely physically disabled, and some people might think you're mentally disabled as well. That has happened a few times, especially when I was in my wheelchair. Now, I understand, no offense to be taken, but as someone who was physically disabled, it annoyed me a little bit when people would assume I'm also mentally disabled, and so I was so desperate to become independent and show people I could be independent, and it was such a desperate thing I was trying to do, trying to improve my abilities, right? And Toph does that as well. Toph is very, very self-independent and tries her best to show people that she is, and gets very angry when people tell her how to do things or what she can and can't do, right? And actually this leads into a perfect segue, because her chats with Iroh are so good, because she's basically being told, look, people are going to help you at certain points. They don't mean it in any way. They want to help you because they love you. They don't mean to undermine you. And that's something we always need to learn as people with disabilities, right? Like, not all the time are people just are people showing pity for you. Sometimes they just want to help because they care for you. And I had those same discussions with my family when I was getting older, especially with my dad. He would bring me out to the car and he would talk to me about this, funnily enough with a cup of tea, but that's because I just love tea. So that scene in particular, I felt extremely related to me, and I just, in Toph's entire character introduction and arc was so relatable for me. I loved this character. I feel like how they depict disabilities and how the experience of having one using her character is fantastic, and the struggles. Now, obviously, I could go into the struggles more in depth, but I'd rather not, because I don't want to be too personal, but I'm sure you get the idea from what I was showing and telling based on her experiences. It's extremely, extremely tough, right? Don't want to accept help, but then you get that one person who says to you, look, people care for you. They're not trying to pity you. They know you can do everything on your own, but we're just trying to make things a little bit easier for you. And I think that was it was so sweet from both Iroh and how he depicted it. He was never demeaning her. He was just being level-headed with her. He never kind of talked down to her. He was treating her like an adult. And that's exactly how you need to get through to people who really want to be independent, including myself at a certain point. And still at some points in my life I am like that. But it's when people start to talk down to you, you get aggressive. Like with Katara and Toph, as shown with her introduction afterwards. It's just, it's fantastic. Not to mention the constant jokes, which makes sense on a completely different level, right? Because we've talked about, like, the idea of how your physical limitations and how you want to test them for yourself. Because when people put limits on you, it makes you want to push even more against it to test your own limits and figure out what you need to improve them. But also another thing is, you don't want people to have to censor themselves around you and coddle you like they're walking on eggshells every time they talk to you, right? So she has the same problem, so she decides to make jokes about her blindness all the time to make people think lightly of it and not be so uptight like they're walking on eggshells every time they see her, focusing on her blindness, focusing on the fact that she is blind and not thinking of any other characteristic of herself, which I think is probably my favorite part of her character, because that was something I struggled with for a long time. I remember when I was in a wheelchair, I was so angry. I hated it. I absolutely hated it because it made me feel like I was, it was the first time I felt like I was really, really separate. I couldn't do a lot of stuff. I needed a lot of help. And it annoyed me to no end. And I thought people just saw me as that. But I was so wrong. And like, you don't want people walking on eggshells, so you constantly make jokes about it. And obviously, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And even afterwards, you still make jokes about your disability because you don't want people to be like, what would you say, politically correct around you. You want them to be open and friendly and be able to make jokes about your disability, be able to make fun of you for it. Have a bit of crack and not be walking on eggshells on you because you just want to be treated normally. And I know different cultures are differently, but here in Ireland, being treated normally is getting the shit slagged out of you, right? Like everyone just slags everyone for the crack. No offenses to be taken, it's just all good fun. And you don't want to be treated differently. Like, it's even now you see people going, like, they're too afraid to say disabled nowadays, so people say less abled, even though there's no issue with the word, right? I have no problem. No one I know has a problem with it. It's just kind of people wanting to be more kind, but to a degree where it feels demeaning, right? Being like changing a word because you feel like it will offend me is more demeaning than just saying I'm disabled, Like, I don't know, maybe that's just me. But to counteract that, you just be jokey all the time and just joke about your disability, even joke about the name changing. And Toph does the same thing. I love the part, especially, where she does the thing where she's like John Cena, where she just puts her hand over her face and goes like this. When they're looking for the temple yoke. I loved that scene. I thought it was amazing. Because it shows everything I'm talking about very, very well. I just think her character's amazing. And it doesn't hurt that she's very powerful because you don't see that very much either. Although I have to say, I did like the depiction of disability in a few other series like Fullmetal Alchemist and even One Piece depicts it quite well, although they're just really missing limbs. They don't pick on many other disabilities besides like not having certain limbs or whatever. I don't even know if is that a category? I don't know if there's like different categories. I'm not like not a scientist, sorry, not a doctor, so I don't know if there's like different categories for that type of stuff. But I do like how what's his name? The smoker guy was handled in FMA. I liked how his development was when he got his injury. But I think Toph is the most relatable and most perfect representation of a disabled person and their struggles in media that I've seen, to be honest. I think the way they portray it is so great. And then not only that, but they also make her a very confident and self-assured character because that is what happens. You go through all these struggles about your identity and about like, oh, am I able to be independent? Will I be needing help? But when you get out the other side and you found your own limits and you found ways to manage them and you've realized, all right, I got to keep working my entire life, but it makes you a stronger person and a more self-assured person. And no one can break that will you have because you worked for it. You worked for such a strong will. And no one can break it anymore. You just don't give a shit. You're now just kind of so secure in yourself. And that happens with Toph when we meet her as well. She goes through small bouts of that insecurity showing up again. But at the end of the day, she's a really self-assured character. And I love it. It's so perfect. It's like it's speaking to me, her entire character. I loved it. Avatar The Last Airbender has been an amazing show. Just with the fact of Toph being a thing alone was probably going to put it up there for me, but it's just fantastic. I've really enjoyed watching this show, and I've really enjoyed Toph's character. Probably my favourite character. I have a lot of love for Sokka and Iroh as well, but definitely Toph is probably at the top. I really enjoyed her character, and her depiction of disability was amazing. And I know I keep bringing that up, but I loved it. I really did. I thought it was the best depiction in media. I've also, not to mention the fact that she likes the tea guy, which helps very much so. But I'm just saying, I'm just saying, her big changing moment involves drinking tea. So that's also a big plus. Got it ended off like a dumbass, right?